The surrender of British General Cornwallis at Yorktown, October 19, 1781. Picture this. General Charles Cornwallis, leader of the British forces, holed up in Yorktown, probably wishing he'd stayed home for tea and crumpets instead of babysitting a revolution that went nuclear. Now imagine him refusing to attend his own surrender, sending his second-in-command to face the music instead. That's right, Cornwallis pulled the 18th century equivalent of calling in sick for gym class on dodgeball day. Meanwhile, George Washington and his allied French buddies were celebrating their "we just beat the world's greatest empire" party with champagne and fireworks. Spoiler, the champagne was metaphorical. The awkward standoff that followed this surrender became one of the most iconic moments in world history, and possibly one of the first documented examples of ghosting in war etiquette. By 1781, the American Revolutionary War was one giant game of cat and mouse between the British and the Continental Army, except the British thought they were the cat. Cornwallis, tired of running through the Carolinas like an 18th century Forrest Gump, had bunkered down in Yorktown, Virginia. His logic? A fort by the sea is practically a cheat code, he thought, assuming the British Navy would save him if things went sideways. But the French Navy, led by Admiral de Grasse, had other plans. They swooped into Chesapeake Bay, blocked British ships, and essentially said, "Not today, Cornwallis." This left him stranded with no reinforcements, dwindling supplies, and a lot of soldiers who probably wanted to mutiny but settled for passive-aggressive grumbling instead. On the other side, Washington had united his scrappy American forces with Rochambeau's polished French troops. Together, they marched south, gleefully trapping Cornwallis like a cat toying with his prey. George Washington, the face of freedom, the teeth of independence, those dentures though. He masterminded the siege and probably had his victory speech rehearsed long before Cornwallis threw in the towel. General Rochambeau, Washington's French BFF, who brought professional soldiers, military flair, and a distinctly European level of shade to the battlefield. Admiral de Grasse blockaded Cornwallis like a pro, making the British Navy look like amateurs in their own backyard. Lord Charles Cornwallis, the guy who didn't show up to his own defeat because he was sick. Sure, buddy. Sick of losing, maybe. O'Hara and Lincoln. Cornwallis sent General Charles O'Hara to surrender, but Washington, in an epic flex, made O'Hara give his sword to General Benjamin Lincoln, the American officer who had previously suffered a humiliating defeat at British hands. Revenge is a dish best served with a side of irony. The Siege of Yorktown was like the Revolutionary War's greatest hits album. You had trenches being dug faster than a gossip column, cannons roaring louder than your neighbor's leaf blower on a Saturday morning, Cornwallis writing desperate letters to British HQ that probably read like, "Send help, pretty please, sincerely totally not panicking." The Allied forces used artillery barrages to batter British defenses day and night. Sleep deprived and running out of supplies, the British soldiers must have felt like extras in a medieval nightmare. Cornwallis made one last Hail Mary attempt to escape across the York River, but a storm wrecked his plan. Nature itself seemed to be on Washington's side, and you can almost hear the French soldiers saying, "C'est la vie, Cornwallis." By October 19th, Cornwallis knew the gig was up. He requested terms of surrender, which Washington granted, albeit with some extra flair. When the British marched out of Yorktown, they weren't allowed their usual ceremonial honors. Instead, they had to play an old tune called "The World Turned Upside Down." The message? The Americans just flipped the script on global empires, baby. Cornwallis, proving that even generals can have fragile egos, didn't attend the ceremony. He sent O'Hara to deliver his sword instead. O'Hara tried to give it to Rochambeau, who just laughed and pointed to Washington. But Washington, in the ultimate passive-aggressive move, pointed to Lincoln, making the British literally hand their surrender to the guy that had humiliated earlier in Charleston. Talk about a full-circle moment. The surrender at Yorktown wasn't just a victory, it was a revolution-defining W for the Americans. The British Parliament, upon hearing the news, collectively sighed, "We're done," and soon started peace negotiations. For Washington, it was the cherry on top of years of struggle, strategy, and questionable haircuts. For the French, it was proof that teaming up with the Americans wasn't just a charitable act, it was a chance to stick it to their old British rivals. As for Cornwallis, he went back to England, where he probably told anyone who'd listen that it wasn't his fault. Spoiler, no one bought it. The Yorktown surrender marked the unofficial end of the American Revolution. It was proof that even underdogs with mismatched uniforms, borrowed cannons, and limited resources could beat the world's most powerful empire if they had guts, strategy, and just a little help from France. For history nerds, it's a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come not from brute force, but from clever teamwork and a well-timed storm or two. So there you have it, folks. The story of how Cornwallis ghosted his own surrender and America declared itself the ultimate plot twist in British history. If this saga teaches us anything, it's that teamwork makes the dream work, even if one side has George Washington and the other has a guy with commitment issues. Cue the fireworks, folks. Yorktown was the mic drop heard around the world.